I'm a little surprised it hasn't happened already, but I don't think we're going to get to Christmas without this war. Well, if the Gaza residents aren't going to go along with this, well, then I guess we'll just have to kill them all. Thank you, Joseph Stalin. That's not something I would have expected to hear from an American president or anybody in the Western world.
Douglas Macgregor claimed that U.S. war with Iran will resume before Christmas. And in this clip, he justifies that, talks about how he believes this ceasefire in Gaza will not lead to any kind of lasting peace, and what are the worst ramifications of this for Americans. Let's get right into it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Now, while I have you here, I do want to get into Iran a little bit because I know we have ongoing concerns that the US and Israel are preparing for the next phase of war against Iran, especially as there's now a ceasefire in Gaza, as you have Trump declaring the war against Hamas over, at least for the moment. What are your concerns about the US engaging in further war against Iran? And is that something we could see as early as Christmas of this year?
Well, first, let me touch briefly on the ceasefire. I don't think the ceasefire is even turning out to be a pause. That was about the most that you could expect from it. The notion that we're going to now enrich the Trump family, Mr. Kushner, Witkoff, or anybody else involved in the reconstruction of Gaza, which really amounts to turning it into some sort of Las Vegas-like destination. I think the probability of those things ever happening is very low. But I do think people have actually maintained those fantasies. But I don't think this ceasefire is going to last. And we already had, within the first 24 hours, 7 Palestinians killed. The Israelis were trying to withhold aid, and only under great pressure have they allowed 600 trucks to move aid and sustenance into Gaza. I don't think this war in Gaza is over. And as I said, we might see a pause, but that's about the most that you can expect. In the meantime, President Trump has stated, I think just within the last couple of hours, that if the people of Gaza won't respect this ceasefire, and I don't know why he said that, but he did, then he says, I guess we'll have to kill them all, which of course is very Stalin-like. Stalin believed in prophylactic justice. Kill the citizen before the citizen gets a chance to commit a crime. That's what it sounds like he wants to do in Gaza, which may be music to Mr. Netanyahu's ears, but I think is reprehensible from the standpoint of an American citizen.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not like the people of Gaza have much of a choice in the matter, right? It's a small number of militants that even oppose Israel at this point. Something like, 13,000 Hamas fighters left. Out of all the people that Israel has killed, about 100,000, probably with many more missing that aren't accounted for. Israel's own numbers have that number above 70,000, I think, at this point. That's where we're at. Macgregor, I want to correct, or maybe not necessarily correct, because maybe they did fold to this, but initially they were only sending 300 aid trucks per day into Gaza, which did violate the ceasefire signed by Israel on October 9th, in which they agreed to allow 600 per day. So maybe they've changed it since, but they've also killed several dozen people since then. And it really depends on, how much either side is going to push this issue. You could argue that Israel's just kind of, treading and going over that line of breaking the ceasefire to try to provoke a reaction and then to justify the reenactment of genocide. And that's what I think the Palestinians fear, rightly so, more than anything. But I agree with him. We are going to get a continuation of this genocide. The Likudniks see the door closing on U.S. support for Israel that will wane over the next decade, and they want to consummate the Greater Israel Project now, occupy Gaza, and create settlements just like in the West Bank, as Smotrich says, the finance minister, who's talked about this openly since the ceasefire.
Can't imagine why anybody would want that. Now, having said all that, let's now touch on Iran. The preparations for war with Iran continue, both on the U.S. and the Israeli side. We are positioning assets at sea, air assets in close proximity, concentrating tankers, all the kinds of things that we've seen in the past. So I think there is a very definite readiness for war. Now, what's the pretext for war with Iran? I don't know. Is it going to be a false flag? I mean, we certainly saw that twice in Syria, that precipitated cruise missile launches into the desert sands there back when President Trump was in office the first time.
Yeah, and I think what he's referring to is this propaganda campaign that Assad gassed his own citizens, and that called for U.S. intervention for 15 years and led to the ascendance of the former emir of Al Qaeda that founded the Al Qaeda affiliate in Syria, Gilani, now known as al Shara, who is the president of Syria now. Backed by the United States. They took a $10 million bounty off his head. Guess why? Netanyahu and the Israelis preferred him to Assad. That's what we got, and that's what he's referring to. But yeah, I think the pretext might be a false flag. That's my biggest fear, by the way, right now, that they organize a false flag, maybe collaborating with Israel, maybe Israel does it on its own volition, and the U.S. creates a new propaganda campaign to bomb Iran again. And the worst case scenario is U.S. boots on the ground in Iran, which Netanyahu clearly wants. He's wanted that regime change war forever, knows that he can't get it with just military strikes. But does he want to send the IDF to Iran? Hell no, he wants to use those forces for genocide in Greater Israel. That's why he wants the U.S. embroiled in this.
Rachel, I don't know, but I think it's going to happen. I'm a little surprised it hasn't happened already, but maybe we had a pause here so that President Trump could burnish his credentials for a future Nobel Peace Prize. I don't know. But I don't think we're going to get to Christmas without this war. Now, there are other opinions. Alistair Crook has suggested, given the weather, that Israeli air power might not be as effective over the winter, and therefore they may wait longer. I don't know, because Mr. Netanyahu's in a difficult position. His popularity in Israel is one thing, but Israel's position with the American people has certainly deteriorated. I don't think a complete break with Israel is by any means in the offing, but he's got to sit back and begin to ask the question of how long can I get away with this unconditional support from the United States? How many people can I ultimately control through whatever means, money and otherwise, on the Hill?
That's exactly what he's thinking. We see that played out as he sat in that meeting with lots of Zionist influencers saying, hey, I hope this deal with TikTok goes through with Larry Ellison to buy that out, the top donor to the IDF, earmarking millions of dollars to the IDF. And hey, let's talk to Elon. And what did he mean by that? He meant let's talk to Elon and try to convince him to censor users on X. You can see that he is thinking about that. He's been a manipulator his entire life, and he wants to manipulate the U.S. into war with Iran. Whether it'll come before Christmas, I don't know. It's hard to put a timetable on that sort of thing, but what I've said from the start is this is not over. This was never over. It hasn't been over since I was a wee young lad and Netanyahu was talking about Iran possibly getting access to a nuclear weapon within weeks, days, months, seconds, negative seconds. You've heard it your entire lives, probably, if you're watching this right now. He'll do it again, and we know he'll do it again.
I don't know the answers to those questions, but I'm sure he's asking those. So, yeah, I think it has to happen before Christmas. But, I could be wrong and they could wait longer.
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of see that back and forth there. And I'm with you. It feels like they're preparing for something sooner rather than later. The last thing I want to get into is just kind of the state of the American people. Because as we've been talking about through this conversation, I mean, you've got Iran, Venezuela, still an ongoing proxy war against Russia, still neocons who want war with China, and so on and so forth. And then adding Gaza back in. And the American people, they're looking around and going, okay, it's almost been a year since the majority of them voted for the guy who told them no new wars, right? I'm going to stop the wars. And even now, Trump is kind of playing this charade of, oh, I've got, 6 or 7 peace deals. He's apparently solving conflicts that we didn't know existed. And he's still trying to keep that as the public front. I don't know if that all goes away just because he didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize, but how do you view the state of the American people and kind of their awareness about what their government is continuing to do, no matter who they vote into office?
I think the American people are aware of rising inflation. I think they're aware that the economy is fragile, though they may not understand the particulars or the details. They're looking at their way of life. They're looking at the criminality. Contrary to popular belief, I think lots of Americans who live close to large cities that have experienced criminality are welcoming many of the things that President Trump wants to do. But even those things don't come across as well planned, well orchestrated. I haven't seen President Trump take to the airways and try to build support for the policies he wants to follow. I think he likes rallies. He likes to go to rallies and interact with people that cheer him, make flippant remarks, exaggerate things, get into the plane and go home. I mean, that's kind of what he does.
Yeah, I agree with him in this part. That is what Trump likes to do. There's no doubt about it, but at some point he can't really try. Americans are sick of war generally. It's not the primary focus of many people, and I think he's totally right. Inflation is, costs of living are, debt is, which spurs on the inflation because the central bank just prints more currency. But really, it's the military industrial complex leading him to unleash more wars and flirt with regime change in Venezuela, by the way, right now, in addition to Iran and fighting a proxy war versus a nuclear power in Russia, and funnel money to Netanyahu as he's conducting a genocide for 2 years. It's not a constituency outside of the big lobbies pointing him in that direction. He doesn't feel like he has to build support for those things because he doesn't. It's just the lobbies. It's not the people supporting that stuff.
What he really needs to do now is the kind of thing that, frankly, FDR did in the late 30s, which is explain why are we doing what we are doing? Why are we going to help the British? Why are we taking the actions we are against Japan? All this for business. It never happened. It never happens now. It needs to. So that's problem number one. But there's something else here that we can't lose sight of, Rachel. And you're down there in San Antonio. You know this better than I do. Most Americans do not pay much attention to what happens beyond their borders. And most Americans think that war is something that happens on somebody else's soil. The possibility that they could be drawn into something and that they could suffer, their families could suffer, their cities, their towns could suffer, I don't think they believe that.
Yeah, I think this is so right. It's so spot on. I hate to say it because you guys know how much I like to follow foreign policy and I talk about it. So it really behooves distance, like myself and like others that do talk about this, to link it to the woes that Americans are facing domestically. They are facing these higher food and gas prices because of the debt the U.S. government and the military empire building apparatus plunges us into, which causes the Federal Reserve Bank to print more money, applying the most insidious tax in some ways, the invisible tax, is what Milton Friedman called it, which is inflation. They don't even have to legislate it. You don't even have to have two houses of the Congress that are comprised of, members that supposedly hate each other to agree to those bills and iron out the particulars, get it on the president's desk. No, you just have the Federal Reserve Board decide to lower or raise interest rates and manipulate the currency through the printing of legal tender currency. That's what they do. So you have to talk about these things in the context of the U.S., and that's just economics. I mean, I use the war on terror as an example all the time to show how, the war on terror was more destructive than just murdering 5 million people and spending $10 trillion because guess what that brought? That brought the Patriot Act. It brought the DHS. It brought an expansion of the surveillance state that we had never seen, and thankfully to the hero Edward Snowden we know about. We got the Patriot Act, the TSA. We got all of that madness, those assaults, those blatant assaults on our civil liberties because of this nonsense. So Americans pay the domestic price even if they don't follow this outside of their own borders.
So it worries me a great deal because we could end up in this seemingly minor intervention in Venezuela that turns into a giant quagmire. But that's the kind of quagmire that could visit us here at home. And that quagmire could ultimately find common ground with other problems overseas. I mean, if you're Chinese and you're Russian and you're sick of the way that we have been treating them, and in fact, just before we started, I received a note from someone that said that President Trump has announced to everyone that India has agreed not to buy any more oil from Russia. But then the spokesman for the Indian government said, that's nonsense. We're going to buy oil and gas from Russia. We don't know what he's talking about.
And why wouldn't they when the U.S. slaps a 50% tariff on India for daring to trade with Russia and nothing else? You're going to push a nuclear power closer to the BRICS alliance than it was already? so that it's totally in the hands of China and Russia now, rather than being kind of a fence sitter on that relationship and actually being close to the president in Trump's first term when Modi and Trump had good relations. That's one of the most disastrous things Trump's ever done, if you ask me. Push India away through these stupid sanction measures, secondary tariffs, for daring to trade with Russia. He's going to push a nuclear power into that alliance, so now it's, the three biggest nuclear powers instead of the U.S. versus us, rather than two, or rather than one.
I don't know what's going on in the White House. I often think they're disconnected from strategic reality. No one's asking any hard questions. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What's the purpose? How do we plan to proceed? What's it going to look like when we're through? What's the strategic impact on us? Not next week, not before Christmas, long term. Everything is short fused. President Trump loves optics. That's what you saw in front of the Knesset. He just said, "Oh, we got a great ceasefire, or everything's coming up roses. We're going to have peace. Everything's going to be wonderful." Then he turns around a day later and says, "Well, if the Gaza residents aren't going to go along with this, well, then I guess we'll just have to kill them all." Thank you, Joseph Stalin. That's not something I would have expected to hear from an American president or anybody in the Western world.
Amen. Hearing that is just ghastly, and it's almost unbelievable, but not so much when you consider how tightly woven this administration is into the fabric of the U.S. Zionist relationship. Not at all, in fact. But in some ways, Trump's given mixed messages on this subject, because there were some comments that Trump made last week, too, that said, hey, you're seeing lots of, mentions and theories that Hamas has violated the ceasefire. And I assure you, Hamas has not violated the ceasefire. And that was really surprising. That tells me that Trump does have an interest in having the ceasefire last, because he wants away from this. He wants away from the critiques of this, despite not wanting to totally sever the U.S.-Israeli relationship. He's totally beholden to that. Miriam Adelson gave him $100 million so that he doesn't be unbeholden to that, of course. He promotes Benjamin Netanyahu, says he deserves a pardon. This war criminal, genocidal maniac deserves a pardon? Of course not. It's absurd. But at the same time, I don't think he would be saying these things about Hamas, things he's never said before, about, no, they're not violating the ceasefire, if he didn't see an interest in keeping it going. We know Israel has violated it. Doesn't seem like it's going to last much longer based upon what we're hearing, I believe about a week in now. But still, I hope it lasts as long as possible. I don't think it's going to lead to a lasting peace, because we saw in that ceasefire agreement, Trump cared much more about the economic redevelopment of Gaza, the Gaza on the Riviera, creating a new board with superlative power over what will be a Palestinian committee there to control the redevelopment, with Tony Blair, the war criminal, the butcher of Iraq, along with George W. Bush. That's what he cares about more. But as to the subject of a potential war with Iran and whether that's going to come again, well, I think it's very possible, because look at this. We're already seeing the war propaganda again. And this is as of over a week ago, I think. But Ben Shapiro, our favorite resident Zionist neocon, never saw a war he didn't want to wage on behalf of Israel, interviewed Netanyahu, and Netanyahu took the specific time in English, knowing that this is an English-speaking audience that will be listening to it, an American audience, saying that Iran is within a cusp of putting New York City, Boston, Washington, or Miami under their atomic guns. Signifying, hey, they're going to get a nuke again, like I've always said for 30 years, and they don't have a nuke. And even when forced into a corner, they didn't try to wipe Israel off the map, and they didn't try to kill U.S. soldiers even in the region. They don't want it. They didn't want a war. But he's clamoring that they do. He's saying Iran can blackmail any American city. Just think of that. When you think about the U.S.-Israeli alliance, our greatest ally in the Middle East, Iran can blackmail any American city? No, I think it's Israel can blackmail any American city through the U.S. government that accepts this, that doesn't push back against it, never uses U.S. leverage to stop it. So, yeah, I think Macgregor's generally right here. I don't know if there's going to be a war with Iran resumed again. Well, there technically is a war, but I don't know if it'll be resumed before Christmas. that's hard to say. The timetable's hard to say, but what I can say is that Netanyahu, the Likudniks, the neocons in the United States, which, yes, still have influence under the Trump administration. I know Trump's fanatics will not admit that, but they do. You name Marco Rubio to the Secretary of State. That's going to happen, by the way. And John Ratcliffe as the head of the CIA. That's going to happen, by the way. So that's what we're looking at. I don't know when it's going to resume, but I know that the erratic behavior and the radical behavior of the most fierce and rigid Zionists is because they do see this time constraint. They do see this door closing of U.S. support for Israel. It's not going to manifest into policy. It's not going to result in the overthrow of the Israel lobby in the United States in the next 2 years or something. But 10 years down the line, every demographic trend is showing that young people are turning against this thing. Boomers are going to die out, and it's not to say there aren't great boomers on this issue that do object to the alliance, but the demographics are very clear on this, that older people are much more interested in supporting that alliance, and younger people just are no longer there, man. They're seeing through this propaganda. It's being noticed, and it will make some changes. It won't overnight, but it will, and that's why the Israelis think that they have to act with the notion that they might have only 10 years to complete this greater Israel project, and the truth is they probably do. So that's what we're seeing here. What do you think, though? Is Macgregor right? Do you see a war with Iran coming before Christmas in terms of a new phase of the war, a new bombing campaign, potential for boots on the ground, flirting with regime change again like Trump did already on Truth Social? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Rachel Blevins. Love this interview. Great interview, Rachel. Thank you for that. And if you like this video and my commentary, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button below. If you do that, you can help support this channel. And by doing that, you'll support this channel, and I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live on the general public on YouTube. Until I see you guys next time, though, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.